The Iron Companion armor is one of the most iconic in all of Destiny. Its medieval aesthetics, gold and green adornments, and of course, the wolf's head cloak made it an instant classic. It was so good that the armor set made a comeback in Destiny 2. It was so good, I needed one in real life. Hey all, Nicholas DeMario here of Powder Hollow Studios, and today I'll be showing off the build process of my Iron Banner cosplay from the game Destiny. On this channel, I'll be posting new creations and tutorials showing off my workflow. We'll be doing a lot of 3D printing and painting some miniatures. We'll take a look at some cosplay stuff and hobby electronics. We'll definitely be casting some metal. And maybe we'll even do a game night. Roll some bones. Alright, let's get started. There's a lot to consider going into this project, and I need a better look at the outfit, so I imported the Hunter model into Blender. This allows me an unrestricted view of the model, and also really lets me admire the work that went into it. I love looking at video game assets and seeing all the tricks and techniques that developers use to make them. I put a link in the description to a great tutorial on how to do this if you wanted to try it on your own Guardian. I'm going to be 3D printing this armor, but there's not enough surface detail that's modeled in. A lot of the detail that you see in video game models is usually just a 2D texture. So, I start tracing around and 3D modeling those areas to give them depth. This way they'll actually show up on a 3D print. A number of techniques were used to make this all happen. If you own a 3D printer but don't have the skill set to do the 3D modeling part, which I get that, it can be very daunting to get into, but oftentimes someone has already done the hard part for you. I actually made these model files available over in my Etsy shop if you wanted to print your own set. Once that's done, it's time to print. I'm working with an Elegoo Neptune 3 Max and printing in PETG. If you're familiar with 3D printing, you know there's a wide selection of materials to print in. PLA is one of the more common you'll come across, and it's one of the more straightforward to print. But I'm working in PETG because it's more durable and heat resistant, but it can be more difficult to print and finish. Using a heat gun can be a great approach for removing supports. I try to soften them just enough to pull them free and not distort the print. A hairdryer would probably work well too if you're dealing with something more delicate. Now it's everyone's favorite part of 3D printing, sanding down those layer lines. There's no real trick that I found for removing these lines. PETG won't respond to vapor smoothing like PLA does, and that would just soften details anyway. The best thing you can do is get your printer really dialed in and slice it for fine detail. Even if it takes an extra long time to print, it will at least give you a nicer surface to work with, which means less sanding and filler. Although, there are some very nice printers out there now, and I wonder just how smooth a print you can get straight off the machine these days. I figure the sanding routine is unavoidable, but what do you think? I'd love to hear some real user experience when it comes to some of the newer printers that are available. There's some pretty tough layer lines throughout these prints, so I try my best with sanding and eventually start applying a filler. Auto body fillers like Bondo are popular choices, but I like using this plastic wood filler. It's a lot more pleasant to work with, and I find it does just as good a job. It doesn't smell, and I can use it without gloves. I load up the surface with it, and after it dries, I scrape around any details that got covered up. Then it's back to sanding. I go up to 400 grit before I spray it with a filler primer. There's lots of different brands of filler primers out there and lots of different opinions out there on which one to use. Here I'm using a Rust-Oleum Automotive filler primer. It's affordable, readily obtainable, and worked well enough for me. I give the pieces 2 coats and let them fully dry. Then I start wet sanding, starting at 600 grit and working my way up to 1500. Finally, a few hours later, with a nice smooth finish, I use this Rust-Oleum Metallics copper spray paint. The pieces were left to dry for 24 hours before weathering. It's one of my favorite parts of the process, though I feel like sometimes I hold back too much. Weathering is absolutely key to making something look real, functional. Then, I added a dirty wash to get into some of the recesses. I noticed that the in-game armor has a darker backing in some of the detailed areas. I considered painting it in by hand, but thought that would take too long, and I didn't want any brush strokes. I decided an airbrush would be the best option here. I used this liquid mask solution to paint over the high points, just the parts that I wanted to stay a bright copper color. I don't remember why I used masking tape on some sections instead of just using all liquid mask. The whole process turned out to be kind of a nightmare, and I think I blocked out most of it. The masking tape peeled away with some difficulty. I even got this particular tape because it claimed to be gentle on surfaces, but it was pulling up some of the metallic finish. The liquid mask stuff was difficult to remove as well, but at least it left the paint underneath intact. Also, my airbrushed areas were pulling up with the tape if I wasn't super careful. The metallic spray paint left too smooth of a surface, so there was nothing for the darker airbrush paint to grab to. For my next attempt, I tried scuffing the areas that were going to be airbrushed. Sorry, but I guess I don't have any footage of actually airbrushing it. I must have really just wanted to get done with this part of the build. At any rate, that seemed to have done the trick, and the paint stayed on there a lot better. And those areas where the tape pulled off the metallic coating actually make the surface look more like the in-game armor. Mission failed successfully, I guess. Let's take a break from the armor and work on some soft parts. The arm and body are wrapped in strips of green fabric. The closest thing that I could find affordably was this white cotton webbing. It has a nice herringbone pattern to it and was the perfect width. But it would have to be dyed green. This was my first journey into dyeing fabrics, outside of tie-dyeing t-shirts. I wound up using this Rit powdered dye since that's what Joann's had in stock. You know, back when we had a Joann's. For dyeing the fabric, there were just a few simple steps to follow, but I'm glad I did some research into it before diving right in. I learned that the color might not be dark enough, so I bought 2 packs of the Kelly green dye. I also learned that I would need a fixative so that the dye doesn't bleed or fade when it's washed. They don't teach you that kind of stuff when you're just doing tie-dyed t-shirts. Sure enough, I decided that 1 packet of dye wasn't quite as dark as I wanted it, so I added the 2nd pack. With the water nice and hot, I dunked the fabric in and let it cook for 30 minutes, stirring occasionally until al dente. The next step was to soak it in the fixative solution while it was still wet, so this Kelly green shader would stay nice and bright for years to come. It was all hosed down and spin dried and then left to air dry outside. Now I had enough of this wrapping material for the costume, and it's the perfect color. The wrappings for the body were sewed directly onto a green turtleneck shirt. Since the wrappings can form so close to the body and these cotton strips don't stretch, there was no way I'd be able to get in and out of the shirt. My sister had the excellent idea of cutting the back of the shirt open and adding a zipper so I could get in and out of it once the straps were sewn in place. Since it was her idea, I made her do it. The arm wraps were a bit more straightforward. They attached the shirt with some Velcro, and every time I suit up, I just wrap them up the arms. Most of this costume is held together with Velcro and button snaps, but we'll take a look at how everything connects shortly. For the pants, the in-game model has some futuristic-looking patches on it, maybe intended to be some kind of padding or soft armor, or maybe just to look cool, knowing Guardians. I actually really struggled to find just the right color and material and fit for the pants. There were a number of trips to the thrift store, and I finally found something that would work. One pair for wearing, and a sacrificial pair for the patches. I also learned a new sewing technique, the backstitch. Much of the sewing on this project was done by hand because of how thick the material is. I'm either sewing through multiple layers or something heavy like canvas or even leather. Which leads me to this leather-like material that appears to wrap around the lower legs. I happened across something like this at Joann's, but this had a close enough color and texture. I'm not really sure what kind of fabric this is, some kind of rubbery canvas material. It was cut into strips and then weathered. It's pretty resilient stuff and took some time to make it look as heavily beat up as it needs to be. When designing a costume, I try to think of ways to make it as easy to put on and take off as possible. The less that needs to be done to suit up, the better. So this was another area to use the zipper technique on. The front of the legs are going to be covered with more armor, so the shins were sliced and a zipper was added. The wraps were then sewn directly onto the pants. For the leg armor, I decided EVA Foam would be the best base to work with. It is a classic cosplay crafting material with a huge amount of versatility. I traced out a rough guesstimation of the shape I would need and started cutting. Some thin strips were glued around the edge to give it a bit more depth and to match the detailing on the original in-game armor. From there, it was just generally shaped and adjusted to fit. A heat gun helps a lot with this process. The EVA foam will generally hold whatever shape you bend it to once it cools. Not bad. Now do it all again for the other leg. Some leather material is glued directly onto the EVA foam. I started with E6000, which is a great industrial adhesive, especially for those of us in the crafting and hobby world, but a little too slow to dry for this particular application. I switched over to a hot glue gun, which worked really well. I think everyone watching this knows what it's like to have a box or drawer full of crafting supplies that they might need one day. I've been holding onto this large sheet of leather for literally 10 years now, and it's finally found a use. The cuffs were made in a similar manner with EVA foam as a base. These cuffs are way too clean for hunter armor though. I used an old emery stick to rough it up a bit. Okay, I've done enough fabric stuff now to where I feel confident about tackling the cape. It has this beautiful iron banner tree design to it, but there's also this subtle diamond pattern as well. I considered a number of fabric materials, from Joann's, and landed on this green felt. I kept the material doubled up so it would look more substantial and have a nice weight to it, something that would keep me warm on the cold moon of Europa. I 3D printed this diamond pattern in multiple sections and taped it all together. The outlines of the diamond should be a lighter color, and since I felt this green fabric was a little too bright, I decided to airbrush the diamonds themselves a darker color green with some fabric paint. It went on well enough, just a very tedious process, but the effort was well worth it. Next up was the tree design. Like the diamond grid pattern, this was also 3D printed as a stencil. I'm working on top of a large whiteboard that I have laying down. It's a nice flat surface, and magnetic, so I can hold this stencil in place with some strong neodymium magnets. And this was easily the worst part of the entire build. The white fabric paint was so transparent that I had to do multiple coats. The paint also just sat on top of the surface of the felt and wouldn't absorb. It was a painfully slow process, and the airbrush constantly got clogged. Maybe I should have just taken a paintbrush to it, but I wanted it to be as evenly applied as possible. I must have went over it at least 5 times. And I had to stop and wait for any buildup on the stencil to dry to avoid runoff. You can see the paint here just clinging to the top of that fuzzy surface. My hands still start to ache a little when I even look at my airbrush, but it was worth it. After all of that, I decided to reward myself with some more thrifting. Here, I found something for the costume that would work almost perfectly if it were the right color. This is an old heating pad, and the pattern matches this padding on the leg of the armor set. I still don't really know what this is supposed to be, if it serves any functional purpose or if it's based on a real-life piece of equipment. If anyone has any idea, please let me know in the comments because I've always been curious about it. Maybe it's just a heating pad. Whatever it is, it's the wrong color, but it's the closest thing I'm going to find, and I do still have some of that fabric paint left over from the cape. I thought about dyeing it like I did the arm wraps, but this is a polyester material, and I don't think that would work too well. I didn't really know how this was going to turn out, so I wasn't too picky about painting it as I was the cape, but ultimately, it turned out really nice. There was one last piece that I couldn't make. The wolf head on this armor set is iconic. It's so important to the build that I didn't even start until I had such a thing in hand. A coyote headdress was the closest I could get. It was advertised as being imitation, but I have my doubts. With all the parts more or less complete, it's time to figure out how everything fits together. The costume is held together mostly by Velcro and button snaps, as I mentioned earlier. Typically I'll use some button snaps and either webbing or elastic, depending on the areas that need to be flexible or if it needs to be more rigid and load-bearing. Either way, the method is the same. I cut a piece of the harness material, elastic or webbing, and go over the cut ends with a lighter, just to melt the material slightly and keep it from fraying. I'll then heat a metal poker and pierce the material with it. I think this is better than using a hole punch tool because this way I'm cauterizing the edges of the hole, which, again, should prevent fraying. Of course, if you're going to do this, please do it in a ventilated area. It can be difficult to glue something directly onto PETG. Here I have one half of a button snap attached to some polyester webbing, another fairly difficult material to glue. But I've found this technique works well. I prepare the surface of both pieces by pressing my hot glue gun against it, slightly melting into the plastic. Doing this prepares the surface for an adhesive, in this case, hot glue. But E6000 or super glue should hold well too. This particular area is how the chest plate is going to connect to the back plate at the shoulder seam. The cape is going to be attached to the armor with snaps as well. Half of the snap is going to be on the facing side of the armor. I drill a hole where I want the snap, but the post that secures the top half to the bottom isn't long enough. So I use a rivet instead to make the connection. It's very close to where the shoulder snap is that we just added, and I have to cut around the webbing a bit. There's a lot of excess post that needs to be trimmed off, and it has to be flared open to make a good hold. This was a rough angle to work at, and it's not pretty, but it's on there. The top half of the button is then attached to the cape. The very last thing to do is add the visor. A pattern slightly larger than the eye slit was traced and laid out on this tinted face shield. This is pretty tough material, and it doesn't help that the edges are secured with metal reinforcements. Small pieces of Velcro will be used to attach each end of the visor to the inside of the helmet. This way, it's removable and adjustable. Oh, I also find that memory foam works excellent as padding for cosplay helmets. A strip of this was cut from a mattress topper and attached with hot glue. Now is our moment of triumph. Let's suit up, Guardian. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. It was a little on the longer side, but I appreciate you sticking through it with me. I've got more cool projects in the works that you might like, so please consider liking the video and subscribing. And thanks for watching.